Intro to AWS D1.1 Structural Steel Welding Code. Clause 4, Qualification. Part 1. I can't do this Clause 4 in one part, so I'm going to go grind through it multiple parts. My name is Gary A. Pace, professional engineer, CWI, Katy, Texas, April 2019. Okay, so we're going to talk about Clause 4, Qualification. In our previous ones, we talked about pre-qualification of WPSs and what it takes to pre-qualify a WPS. Now we're going to talk about qualification for AWS D1.1. And I'm not going to, we're just going to go through this. I'm going to hit the paragraphs in here that I think are maybe a little more noteworthy of having a chat about and give you my version of how things work or how I've seen it work in the past. But we're going to talk about qualifications, talk about some of the paragraphs in here, and then the general overall scope of Clause 4, and then how it ties into AWS D1.1. As I do every YouTube video that I put together, I tell you where I snagged most of the material out of the public domain: Nuclear Regulatory Commission, CANDU, the Canadian Deuterium, Uranium, Nuclear Reactor people, and the U.S. Army. And I've also pilfered some stuff from some U.S. Navy manuals. So just thought I'd throw that out there, let everybody know where I got most of my material from, and then I've just kind of added on and gone from there. Parts of a welding program. I'm going to kind of back up before we go forward. So almost every welding program, you're going to need a few documents. You're going to need welding procedure specifications, WPSs. You're going to need welding procedure qualification records, which is a PQR. PQRs support the WPS. And you're going to need welding performance qualification records, which are the documents that qualify your welders. That's your paperwork that says, yeah, this welder did this test and he can run this filler material in this position and make a deposit sound weld metal. So this is the backbone of your welding program. You're probably going to need some filler metal control procedures, some purchasing procedures, and whatever. But for a solid welding program, you're going to need at least these three and some other documentation. WPS. A welding procedure specification is a qualified instruction on how to complete the weld. This is basically the recipe. This is the recipe you're giving the welder on how to make the weld. A PQR is a procedure qualification record. It's the record of the welding parameters and test results that were utilized to make a test plate where you did some bend tests and you did some tensile tests and whatever other testing that you're going to need to support your WPS. This is a written document that has lab test reports, that you did the bend test, that you did the tensile tests and all that stuff. A WPQ is a welder performance qualification. This is a record of the weld test results in the range of approval. This says that the welder can weld in a certain position with a certain filler metal. He's running open root, 6G pipe, whatever he's got going on. This is the documentation for the welder that says your welders are qualified. Why procedure qualification is required. The purpose of a welding procedure, a specification, a WPS, and procedure qualification record is to determine that the welding operation proposed for fabrication are capable of producing welds with required properties for intended applications, assuming that the welder performing the welding procedure qualification test is a skilled workman. A procedure qualification test is used to establish the properties of the weldment and not the skill of the welder. So this is just a fancy way of saying the WPS is the recipe and the PQR is the test documentation that we used to support that this is a solid procedure or method for joining weld metal A to weld metal B and using a filler metal. The one I always use with some of my students is, if we were, and this is an extreme example, that if we were welding plywood to cardboard and using bubble gum, we would document that we're welding the plywood to the cardboard and we're using bubble gum, to weld it together. And we would put this together, and then we would pull some bend tests or pull some tensile tests and do some bend tests on it, and we would document that our plywood to cardboard using bubble gum was a procedure that met the criteria for whatever we were building, the mechanical criteria. So that's what a procedure qualification test or record is, PQR. Then we would use that to write our WPS, the Weld Procedure Specification, which is the recipe. And then this is where we would tell the welder, okay, you're going to use this kind of cardboard and this kind of plywood, and you're going to use this specific brand of bubble gum. You can only use grape bubble gum. You can't use the pink stuff. And the welder is going to follow that recipe, making these welds with plywood, cardboard, and bubble gum. I don't know. Kind of an outlandish way to think about it, but it's extreme, but that's what I got for you. Welding Procedure Specification is a required document for all code welding. Your customer either directly or indirectly specifies to what code your company must qualify. The WPS outlines all of the parameters required to perform your welding operation. In short, the WPS is the recipe for welding operations. It describes the welding process or processes used, the base materials used, the joint design and geometry, gases and flow rates, welding position, and includes all the process conditions and variables. Each code has a recommended format. That's what a welding procedure specification is. It's whatever code you're making your structure or component to is going to specify what needs to be into your WPS. Procedure Qualification Record, PQR, is the document that qualifies the welding procedure specification. In order to qualify your WPS, a procedure qualification plate is welded to the code requirements. The actual test parameters are recorded at the time of welding to ensure the WPS was being followed. So you kind of have a pre-WPS. A lot of companies will have you do a pre-WPS, a PWPS, where you tell them what you're going to do before you do it so they can say, nah, this probably isn't going to work. And this is with qualification. This is clause 4, qualification, but it also comes into play here because we're not going to need a procedure qualification record. The PQR combines all the information of the WPS and adds the test results to provide a complete document that certifies the welding specification. Tells everybody what we did, how we did it, when we did it, the date, time, everything. This document is also required by all codes unless you are qualifying under the American Welding Society specifications. Under certain conditions, the WPS may be considered pre-qualified, in which the PQR is not required. So that's where we're headed in this episode. In the next episode, we'll talk about needing a PQR. But we're talking about pre-qualification. Here we have a WPS, Welding Procedure Specification. This is an ASME Section 9 American Society of Mechanical Engineers, but an AWS one looks pretty damn similar. You're going to list filler metals and techniques and address all the essential and non-essential variables on here, preheats, positions, whatever information is required by that code. If you like this format, you can use it. If you don't like this format, you can invent your own. Most codes have a suggested format, but if you've got one that you like, run with it. I worked for a company years ago, and theirs was all written out. We did ASME work, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, a lot of ASME work. So we just had everything typed out and addressed in paragraph form. Didn't look anything like this. It looked like a book report or something. But it worked. Our clients liked it. Everything was addressed. We had a couple little sketches on there, maybe a table or two, but that's what it looked like. This is what a welding procedure specification looks like. Clause 4, qualification. 4.1, scope. The requirements for qualification of testing of welding procedure specifications and welding personnel are described as follows. So this is broken down into 4 different parts. We got part A, which is general requirements. This is for both WPSs and personnel. Part B is just for welding procedure specifications, qualification. This is just for WPSs that are not part of Clause 3, which is pre-qualification. And then we're going to have Part C, which is performance qualification, which is qualifying the people. And then you got Part D, which is the requirements for CVN testing, impact testing, when specified by contract documents. So we're going to do a slow grind through Clause 4. It's probably going to take me 2 or 3 of these videos to grind through it. So let's just jump in. General 4.2. The requirements for qualification testing of WPSs and welding personnel, defined as welders, welding operators, and tack welders, are described in this section. 4.2.1 Welding procedure specifications, the WPS, except for pre-qualified WPSs conforming to the requirements of Clause 3, a WPS for use in production welding shall be qualified in conformance with Clause 4, Part B. Properly documented evidence of previous WPS qualifications may be used. So this is telling us general requirements. This covers the qualification testing of WPSs and people. That's what Clause 4 is. This isn't for design. It isn't for anything else. It isn't for inspection. It is just for qualification of welders, welding operators, tack welders. I just kind of lump all those under welders. And WPSs. That's it. That's the scope of this clause, chapter, area of the code. So then we have 4.2.1.1, Qualification Responsibility. Each manufacturer or contractor shall conduct these tests required to this code to qualify the WPS. Properly documented WPSs qualified under the provisions of this code by a company that later has a name change due to voluntary action or consolidation with a parent company may utilize the new name on its WPS documents while maintaining the supporting PQR qualification records with the old company name. Because some of these companies have been around for 50 years or 60 years and they get bought up. But let's say you have an old WPS, you buy a company that's got some WPSs from back in the day, you can incorporate their WPSs into your work. The PQRs stay the same. You just have to have paperwork that says this is how we started it. You don't do anything with the PQRs, but the WPSs, you just write a new revision, put the new name on it, reference the old PQR, and you're ready to go. 4.2.1.2 WPS qualification to other standards. The acceptability of qualification to other standards is the engineer's responsibility to be exercised based on either the specific structure or service conditions, or both. AWS D1.1 XXXX series on standard welding procedure specifications may in this manner be accepted for use in this code. So the AWS D1.1 series is just some WPSs that have been qualified by the American Welding Society, and I'm not exactly sure how it works, but you can buy a license to use their these welding procedures, and I think you have to do some kind of testing or make a mock-up, and you can use them for this code. Or if you have a procedure that was qualified, let's say to ASME Section 9, and you welded base materials that you're going to use on this job, and the um, engineer says, yeah, sure, go with it. It looks like it's been done well. I'll accept these uh, WPSs. PQRs and the WPSs look good. I'll accept them. So that can be done. I've worked on a couple of jobs where you show up with an we got accepted a ASME Section 9. It was a 7018 procedure, and it was welding some material that wasn't listed in AWS Table 3.1. So the engineer looked at it, and it was a garden variety type of carbon steel, and they said, yeah, you can use this. Not a problem. The engineer, this gets back to the engineer of record who's designing whatever. They have a lot of power in this code. So they can say, yeah, no, they just have to document it and let you know why they were doing it. Well, they don't even have to let you know why. They just say, I'm the engineer, we're doing it. I've done the calculations, and then you move on. So, but yeah, the engineer has a lot of power, and if they want to, they can accept qualifications to other codes and standards. CVN Test Requirements. When required by a contract document, CVN tests shall be included in the WPS qualification. The CVN tests, requirements, and procedures shall be in conformance with the provisions of Part D of this section or as specified in the contract documents. So this code doesn't really call out when you need impact testing, the CVN test, but it says if you're going to do it, then you got to follow these rules. That's all that's telling you. So the engineer and wherever you're building this, they're going to decide if you need impact testing or not. Performance qualification of welding personnel. Welders, welding operators, and tack welders to be employed to weld under this code and using the shielded arc welding, SMAW, SAW, GMAW, GTAW, flux cored arc welding, electroslag, or electrogas processes shall have been qualified by the applicable tests as described in Part C of this section. So that means we're just got to go to Part C, and Part C is what covers welding personnel. So that's one of the keys to this code, is not reading something and then thinking, oh God, I got to do that. You got to stay in your swim lanes. So that's why they have these things broken out into Part A, Part B, Part C, Part D, right? So that you stay in your swim lanes. That's where I've gotten, you talk to some people and they're like, oh, you need to do this, this, and this. And it's like, no, that doesn't even pertain to what the hell we're doing. That is outside the scope. That's another swim lane. We're talking about this specifically, this specific item, and that's it. So something to keep in mind going forward is that you got to stay in your swim lane. Keep focused on, hey, Part A is this. I'm just going to do this. I read something in another part of this chapter that doesn't pertain. No, I'm not going to get sidetracked by that. I'm going to stay in this area, in this swim lane. Previous performance qualification. Previous performance qualification tests of welders, welding operators, and tack welders that are properly documented are acceptable with the approval of the engineer. The acceptability of performance qualification to other standards is the engineer's responsibility to be exercised based upon the specific structure or service conditions or both. So in the past, I've accepted ASME Section 9 personnel qualifications. The guy can weld with 7018 and a 6G position. They've got it documented. All right, I'm going to accept that. Or the individual has got flux core certs to ASME Section 9. I'm going to accept those. A lot of there's some overlap, and that's why they built this in there, is so, all right, I don't have to go give this guy 23 different, performance qualifications. The guy can do it. It saves companies money, And it's the engineer. If the engineer wants to be a stickler for it and say, nope, I'm not accepting this, they can. Or they can look at it and say, yeah, the guy can run, gas metal arc welding with ER70S2. All right, bring him on. We'll accept that. So once again, the engineer's got some superpowers that they can utilize, and it's up to them if they want to accept previous performance qualification records. Some qualifications done to another code. So qualification responsibility. Each manufacturer or contractor shall be responsible for the qualification of welders, welding operators, and tack welders, whether the qualification is conducted by the manufacturer, contractor, or an independent testing agency. So the manufacturer or contractor is responsible. You're responsible no matter who does the qualification. If you send your guys down to an independent lab, there's a bunch of those here in Houston, where I can send my guy over and, all right, give this guy, 7018 on 1-inch plate, vertical up and horizontal. Let me know how he does. They've done the testing, but I'm responsible. My company, my organization is responsible for the qualification. And we've got options. I could qualify them in-house. I can have an independent agency qualify it. But I am responsible for getting my welders qualified. And it gives me a couple of different avenues to do that. 4.2.3, period of effectiveness. 4.2.3.1, welder and welding operators. The welders or welding operators qualification as specified in this code shall be considered as remaining in effect indefinitely unless 1. The welder is not engaged in a given process of welding for which the welder or welding operator is qualified for a period of exceeding 6 months, or there is some specific reason to question the welding or welding operator's ability. Number 1, 6 months. So that's why we'll get into it next slide. We'll talk about a continuity log. Number 2 is you can't, if the guy's losing his eyesight or there's some reason to question that guy's ability to make a weld, you can pull his certs. And I have used this as a tool, a negotiating tool in previous jobs, where there was a welder and he didn't have the skills anymore. He had lost the hand. And I had to talk to his foreman and be like, man, you can't have this guy making critical welds. Can you have him welding on something where I don't have to look at it, that doesn't require inspection? Because I'm going to pull his certs and we'll take him over to the test shack and run him through the full meal deal again. And they agreed that the guy's eyesight maybe wasn't what it once had been. And anyways, we didn't have to pull the guy's certs, but they got him welding on non-critical type stuff. But anyways, this is or 6 months. If a guy doesn't use shielded metal arc welding for 6 months, all his shielded metal arc welding certs are gone. And then you can requalify them, and there's some stuff you can do there. But if a guy doesn't use a process for 6 months, his certs are gone. Welding codes like AWS D1.1 and ASME Section 9 require welders to weld at least every 6 months with each welding process that they are qualified to. This is so that the welder can maintain their welding qualifications for that process. When a welder does not use a welding process during a 6-month period, the codes state that the qualifications for that process shall expire. In the welding world, this is referred to as maintaining welder continuity. So this is telling you that if you're the person in charge of it, you need to keep track of watching that welder use that welding process every 6 months. Places I worked, we used to do it every 4 months. I would go out every 4 months because then there was no way I would get stung, right? And if I missed my 4 months and I was like, oh God, I got to go get guys, then I was in 5 months. But usually it never happened where I had to pull somebody's certs because I messed up and didn't see him use a process. One of the things I used to do for this, if we had a lot of work going through the shop at a certain time and a guy wasn't using stick welding, shielded metal arc, and I needed to get his continuities in, I would just set up one welding booth and then get a whole stack of welding rod and bring every welder in the shop through, have them make 2 welds. Yep, he made a weld. I'd initial it off, and I'd get everybody for that process. Or if there was guys with TIG certs, gas tungsten arc certs that hadn't used the process, I'd set up a booth for that and grind everybody through there and make sure I had everybody's certs up to date. So, but continuity log is something really important to maintain in a welding program. So, something to think about. If you've never done a continuity log, this is what they look like. You have the employee, and then you have your welding processes. And then you just go through and, we did it by job number, and you just list the dates and, as long as you keep everybody going every 6 months. And this is one way to keep track of it. Another place I worked, they had a database, like an Access database. Somebody had made a database with Microsoft Access, and that worked pretty good. And you just go in and punch in, yep, the guy did it at this point in time. So that's another method. Or you can just get a piece of paper and a notebook if you want to go old school, as long as you got a copy of it. Another place I worked, we only had about, I want to say 15 or 20 welders. So about every 4 months, I would go in and print up a bunch of these sheets, fill out the welder's name, his ID number, and then I'd walk around the shop. Yep, I saw him run stick today. I saw him run TIG. Saw him run short arc GMAW. I saw him run flux core or GMIW pulse spray. And this is another way to keep track of a continuity log. And then I just go through it. Each welder had or I think I did it by every 4 months, but I'd have a stack of these, that I had done every welder, throw them in the file cabinet, and then when we'd get audited, I'd break everything out. Yep, I saw him do them on these days, and we were good to go. Common requirements for WPSs and welding personnel performance qualifications. 431. Qualification to earlier editions. Qualifications which were performed to and met the requirements of earlier editions of AWS D1.1 or AWS D1.0 or AWS 2.0 while those editions were in effect are valid and may be used. The use of earlier editions shall be prohibited for new qualifications in lieu of the current editions unless the specific earlier editions is specified in the contract documents. So if you have a weld procedure that was qualified to the 1983 version of AWS D1.1, you get to keep that procedure qualification. But a lot of stuff has changed since then, I am sure. So you can't go back to the 1980 code. You can't go back and say, well, I'm going to qualify my welders to that code edition. No, it's grandfathered in, but you can't go back to it unless it says so in the contract documents. So anything done to a previous version of the code, it's good. We're not going to undo that and make you redo everything. But you can't go back and use a cherry pick and use an earlier version of the code to do work in the 2019, using a 1987 version of the code or whatever year it was printed in. I don't know. They print them in various years. So, but that's how the rules work. So anything in the past that was done in the past, you can use it now. You just can't go back and use old editions of the code to qualify either people or WPSs. All welds shall be classified as flat, horizontal, vertical, or overhead in conformance with the definitions shown in Figure 4.1, 4.2, and 9.12.1. Test assembly positions are shown in. So then they've got these groove, and fillet weld. You know, shows you the fillet weld and groove weld positions. So, everything is in the codes, whether you're qualifying people or procedures, everything has a position. So you have to, it's just the language. So that's what this one's saying. It's just saying everything that we do is in a position, and these are the positions, and these how we are going to refer to these positions. 4.3.3 Records. Records of the test results shall be kept by the manufacturer or contractor and shall be made available to those authorized to examine them. That's just telling you you're living in an adult world. You got to have records. You can't just give your guys a weld test and say, oh yeah, Fred over there, I gave him a test 6 months ago, but didn't keep any results. I'm just telling you he passed. This is telling you it's big. You're playing in the big end of the pool. You got to write things down on paper. Get a filing cabinet. Keep some documentation like grown-ups do. And I'm kind of sarcastic there, but it's also the truth, because I think you run across some places that, all right, we can weld, but we don't do documentation. So, anyways, you got to keep records. It's the rules. It's grown-up time. We're in 2019. Okay, so in this module, we covered qualification, or a slice of qualification. In Clause 4, we covered the general scope of Clause 4, qualification responsibility, that, who's responsible for qualification, WPS qualification, other standards. So if we qualified a WPS, a PQR, and a WPS to ASME Section 9, that the engineer does have the ability to say, yeah, that's good. These guys can use it in constructing whatever we need built. Qualification responsibility, we touched on, as I just said. Period of effectiveness, how long are the welder certs good for? If they aren't using that process and it's not documented, then they've got 6 months. We talked about a continuity log, which ties into the period of effectiveness. And we also talked about position of welds. Laying it out that, okay, that we're all speaking the same language when we talk about positions of welds. These are the standardized positions. This is uphill, this is downhill, this is sideways, this is, 6G, 4G, whatever. So that we all have a basic reference point in regards to positions of welds. So that's what we covered. I'll try and crank another one of these out here shortly. Questions, comments, you guys know how to track me down. In regards to kind of the modular nature of how I've been doing this, some of you might notice that some of this material gets repeated. These are, I didn't sit down and think that this was going to be like, I was going to do this many of these. But anyways, so they're meant to kind of be a standalone. Each one of these modules, or I don't know, YouTube videos or whatever we're calling them, is meant to be a standalone, but it's also meant to tie into other stuff. So I kind of run into a problem of, how much material should I include in each one, and how many should I just think, okay, this guy has this as a baseline amount of information. I won't include it in this one because it's in another one. So that's kind of why the modular nature of these, and I use some slides over and over, and you might fast forward through that if you've seen it on 3 other slides. But if this is the first time you've seen the material, then for all means, just sit through it and enjoy, I guess. So anyways, everybody take care. My name's Gary Pace. I'm a PE CWI out of Katy, Texas. You guys know how to contact me. There's my website. Take care. GP out.